Imagine you're playing Dragon Quest III for the first time. You're rightfully confused by the personality system and look up a guide. And you figure Lone Wolf looks good. But maybe after some research you find out that there's an accessory called the Skull Wing that gives you said personality. Now, the next step would be to find out where the nearest Skull Wing is located. So you'd open up your search engine of choice and type in Dragon Quest Skull Wing. The top 3 results are going to be the .org wiki, the Fandom wiki and Game8's wiki. Wow, not 1 but 3 sites telling you where to go. Isn't that amazing? And they all have very clear answers. The .org wiki says that a Skull Wing can be found in a chest at the Pirate's Den. The Fandom wiki says the same and it's phrased in an eerily similar way. And Game8 says that it can not only be found in the Pirate's Den, another one can be found in Candlin. It's odd that the first 2 didn't mention this, but whatever. That sure seems like you have to wait until you reach the Pirate's Den in order to find a Skull Wing, right? Well, what all of these sites fail to mention is that there's a Skull Wing in Skyfell Tower. Not at all hidden, right next to the first mandatory boss. Meaning that I bet you watching this video, anybody that ever played the game opened this chest and chances are you already knew that this was there. But how is a new player supposed to know? Keep in mind this location is extremely early in the game, so when it matters the most. This is the only Skull Wing in the game that might have an impact, yet all 3 of these sites fail to mention this crucial information. Honestly, this sucks, and if all those sites fail, then where are you supposed to go? Is this normal? How do you even know what to trust on these sites? How did we get here and what can we do against it? Game8 is a for-profit corporation located in Japan that advertises itself as the top gaming walkthroughs straight from Japan. Game8 isn't just one single site, it describes the original Japanese Game8 as well as Game8 Global Incorporated, which is a recent offspring that only covers the new games as they come out. The site that comes up when you enter English words into your search engine is Game8 Global Incorporated, so I will put aside the Japanese side for a little bit and focus on what people actually have to deal with. Game8 is corporately made. No fans work on it, the guides are made entirely by professional writers. And at least to me, that implies some quality control. For the next section, I want you to keep in mind that someone was paid a full salary for writing everything on here. So on its side, Game8 lists 8 promises to its users, one more presumptuous than the last. The first is that they want to make the kind of content that others can't imitate. And in a sense they're correct. I've covered before how they have an entire page covering the paralyzing gas ability in 3HD that they entirely made up. It's an ability that doesn't exist. They made up its effect, they made up your requirements for learning it. I don't think anyone else is putting that one in their wikis. But besides that, the statement to be groundbreaking while making guides is a bit shallow. I'd expect values like precision or diligence, not that they're inventing something new. But next on the long list of promises, to be agile. That sounds neat and it's true. English Game8 had their guides on Dragon Quest III out on day 1, but that seems to sort of contradict with number 3. They make their guides by playing the games, but even if they got a copy earlier, how much playing could they have really done? And what's more is that their guides haven't been changed at all since day 1. But let's actually read the walkthrough for a second. Immediately it starts with image number 1. Telling you to grind to level 3 before anything else. And there's thousands of examples where I disagree with tactical advice, but I think this is about as subjective as it gets. Level ups refill your HP and MP in 3HD, and the beginning is perfectly balanced in such a way that if you just keep fighting enemies, even if your party isn't optimized, even if you don't have a priest, even if you don't use medicinal herbs, you just get so many free refills that there's absolutely no threats until you reach Romaria. If someone tells you to grind before the tutorial, then they don't know what they're talking about. And this gets me to a point I've made more widely about guides before. A lot of people, like Aquano, think you make guides by playing a game once, then writing down what you did. I can't say for sure that that's how it was made, but English Game8 looks very suspiciously like that's exactly how it was made. Their fourth promise is that they don't steal, and that one is kind of troubling. In a sense that's very noble and all, but could they really not get permission to simply translate Japanese Game8? Because that site has way less misinformation. And hey, that's the 7th promise. But how much misinformation can there be, right? On the heroes page they list the recall and remember stuff as both a spell and an ability, while in fact they're neither, they're a game mechanic. A game mechanic that functions independently from the hero, meaning in post-game if you remove the hero from your party or if they die, you still have the ability to recall and remember. This is just more abilities they invented. They were an ability on the Super Famicom, but I thought they got their information from playing the game, right? On the Warriors page, there's nothing that's as much of a total failure as inventing an ability, but I want to point out how vague the ability descriptions are. Cop Out says that it redirects attacks. Whipping Boy says that it redirects attacks that were targeted at an ally. So let's assume an enemy uses a non-targeting spell. Which of these abilities will redirect the attack? You probably know already, Whipping Boy redirects it and Cop Out doesn't. Because in actuality, despite Game 8 claiming the opposite, Whipping Boy doesn't care whether an attack was targeting or not, and Cop Out only specifically deflects physical single target attacks. The Guardabouts page just doesn't list Spooky Hour, which is the most important ability. For the Thief, I want to simply let an anonymous commenter share their opinion on the page. The Martial Artist page claims that Critical Claim is learned at level 64 and it costs 64 MP. Only one of those 64s is correct, can you guess which one? The Merchant page lists Master Strength twice. Because why not? And they make it seem like merchants have it inherently, but you learn it at level 9. The Mage page claims that they have spells that heal your party similar to the Sage. Again, what version of 3 are they playing where they have all these extra abilities? And lastly I want to talk about the Priest, and while there's nothing blatantly wrong with the page, I've already talked at length about how starting with a Priest actively slows your progress and worsens your experience in both the short as well as the long term. And here there's Game 8 saying that you should always have one. At least that article doesn't have misinformation, right? What I did just now wasn't actual research, I just went through a couple of the pages for the party members, the most viewed parts of the wiki, and I showed that there's something objectively wrong about just the ability section for every single one of them. Not a bad piece of advice that can be argued about, but misinformation. But what about the Priest, I hear you cry in the distance? Didn't I not find anything wrong about their page? Well no, I didn't. That's because the Priest page is empty. They absolutely don't list a single spell on there. They just didn't make it. And lastly, I want to point out that all classes have this hint that you should try the Vamp personality because it's well rounded. They copy pasted it onto each article. Friendly reminder. Someone puts food on the table making these guides. But in case you thought, oh that's all? Well, here's another friendly reminder. Those were the most viewed parts of the wiki. Everything else on Global Game 8 is worse. This is as good as it gets. It's just not interesting for me to analyze empty articles or to point out that item locations are wrong. I don't want to dwell on Game 8 for too long, seriously. But the Japanese version is actually alright. Why did they have to make it bad before going global? I don't know what's going on there internally, why they can't just translate the Japanese side. Using Google Translate to Japanese Game 8 is not only much better in terms of the quality, they don't use English ability names either way. English Game 8 calls Oomph not Bykill, which was the old localization, which would still be weird but acceptable, but Twin Hits. How do you even come up with twin hits? This already looks Google translated. Out of all the sites I'll be discussing today, Global Game 8 is by far the worst, at least in terms of quality. This is completely unusable. I wouldn't be surprised if some parts were AI generated. You know, earlier I was going through all their promises. I think in light of all this nonsense on the site, I don't need to explain why the promises number 6 and 8 are sadly broken as well. A lot of Game 8's problems are rooted in the corporation's lack of interest in both the Dragon Quest IP as well as the quality of information available to Dragon Quest fans. Their priority was to minimize the effort it took to barely get a passing grade, and I'd argue they only get that passing grade at first glance. None of this, however, applies to the Fandom Wiki, which is a site that anyone can edit. How thrilling! A site by the fans for the fans. Let's see what the people are saying about this one. request to kill this wiki. I made it a point to not come to this wiki. Syntax include very little information, bad spelling and grammar. Shoutouts to Hero of Slime. There's something oddly charming about posting a polite request to kill the wiki. Personally, I wouldn't have arrived at the conclusion to make a public post on the Fandom wiki itself, but I think me including Fandom in this video has the same causes as Hero of Slime's post, by which I don't mean the specific problems, but more the underlying causes for why they exist, which are a lack of moderation and a lack of people willing to do work for Fandom. But I can't discuss a Fandom wiki without addressing the elephant in the room that is Fandom itself. The way the company operates is that they provide free hosting and software to fans who then write all the articles. The downside, however, is that Fandom doesn't care about the user experience. From the heavy advertisement to changes to existing sites that are only made with search engine optimization in mind, there's a lot dragging the site down. So the fans that put in all the work aren't free to make the site they want. A lot of gaming communities try to move away from Fandom, which is why independent wiki alliances become more and more common. Fandom itself isn't seen as a permanent solution, and quite frankly it isn't. A lot of people that want to work on a wiki make it a point not to support Fandom. So the company and its business practices are keeping people from putting time and effort into the site, especially when it comes to moderating what others do. So the wiki mostly consists of empty pages and almost nothing that could be labeled as high quality. And the few entries that are good are most likely stolen. They plagiarized an absurd amount, mainly from the .org wiki. Let's compare both sides' entries on the Dranquest 8 hero. He's an 18-year-old, low-ranking royal guardsman at Castle Trudane on the .org wiki, but on the Fandom wiki it is in Castle Trudane. Not to mention that the grammatical tense only makes sense on the .org wiki. He's a guardsman before becoming something else. Meanwhile, on the Fandom wiki it starts in present tense, he is a guardsman, but then in the next sentence he was one of the survivors. By the time he survived the attack on Trudane, he wasn't a guardsman there anymore. The events long before the game are in present tense, and the events that take place afterwards are in past tense. That is because they stole the sentence and forced it into a context where it doesn't work. The hero is a versatile character, as equally in armed combat as he is in using healing spells and support magic. His preferred weapons are swords, spears and boomerangs. Now try to spot the difference. The Fandom wiki added one-handed to the swords, spears and boomerangs. Now the funny thing about that is that Dranquest 8 doesn't have two-handed weapons. It's frankly pathetic. This is beneath a first grader trying to change the friend's homework, and it's everywhere. While writing the script I was planning a similar approach to what I did with Game 8's promises. So I went to check their guidelines and wanted to find the part where they tell people not to steal. But let me just read out the first point of the content policy real quick. While abuses are not tolerated, bravery is rewarded. Remember, fortune favors the bold. Which means if you feel that the policies and guidelines in this wiki should be ignored in order to improve the content of a page, just do it. As long as it's not abuse, any improvement will be appreciated. Bear in mind though that such actions can also be easily reversed by anyone else without recourse, since they go beyond what's covered in the guidelines. So try to do such actions only when you are convinced that it's an improvement that will be appreciated by most. And only the second point is then, do not steal text from other wikis or websites. Try to write with your own words what you read elsewhere. Which, by the way, is encouraging this elementary school type of plagiarization. And this isn't about them quote-unquote stealing facts. This isn't that they list the same information. It's that they use the exact same phrasing in the same structure, just with a few words added or swapped around. But the worst part of them stealing is that the .org wiki they're stealing from has its own share of problems. The .org wiki is the theoretical indie wiki haven for the community where fans are uninhibited. The place where anyone interested in Dranquest can go in order to write their own articles and edit out errors that other users made. And generally the articles here aren't as filled with spelling errors and outright lies as the ones on the Fandom wiki. But before making any judgment, let's look at an article first. That section from the warrior entry seems subjective and very politically charged. The language is extremely loaded. It wasn't a design change, it wasn't even censorship. She, as if she was a real person, was the victim of censorship. It's overly dramatic and out of place on a wiki now, isn't it? The same goes for the article on 3HD. It starts out normal, then there's this massive block about censorship and then credits for the rest of it. More words are dedicated to the drama surrounding it than to the actual product. Leave your own opinion on this matter at the door for a second. But does this sound like someone's trying the least bit to be objective? Foreign meddling mandates the censoring of the words man and women and forced Hori to utilize the awkward workaround of appearance A and B despite everything else in the game acknowledging the common sense differences between the two sexes? Again, why is this on a wiki? But those are only isolated examples. A much more tangible problem with the site is how many entries are outright missing. Tyrion, for example, doesn't have an entry on the .org wiki despite being a major boss in Dragon Quest XI that guards one of the orbs. He has his own cutscene and everything, and while it's funny to point out how irrelevant Tyrion is, that's not a small gap. That's not an item location missing or an ability, but one of the spectral sentinels. If we are looking at spin-offs, it's not too uncommon for even the final bosses to not have an entry. And if we check the user activity, then it becomes apparent why. There's only one active editor, the single admin follower of Light. But it's not like there's just no interest in editing Dragon Quest wikis. The French one, for example, has 5 active users, and that's despite it being the French wiki. So what exactly makes the English.org wiki so unappealing? Well, we already heard the name. It's follower of Light, also known as Billion, the site's admin. A few years ago, the previous owner, Flying Ragnar, left the whole thing to him. I'll go a bit more in depth on this later, but it was at the climax of an argument, not meant as a gift, but Flying Ragnar dumped all the responsibility on him out of spite. Flying Ragnar was the previous problem. The only reason I'm not going to talk about how he mismanaged the wiki is, well, mostly it's because he didn't really manage anything, he was pretty inactive, but it's because he's no longer around and therefore not the issue. That's in the past. But what exactly is Follower of Light's deal right now? To introduce him, I'd like to take a quick look at the latest revision summary on the site. Frog Wiki yeeted due to being run by a Fujo shit turned unironic Discord, a trans person that's pro censorship. And I level with you, I had no idea what this meant the first time I read it. All I could tell is that whoever wrote this doesn't like trans people very much and couldn't possibly be a well-adjusted individual. But after figuring out what it meant, it only got worse. So the Frog Wiki means the French wiki, and yeeted means that the affiliation with the site ended. More on that in a bit. And Fujo shit is apparently just an insult. You have to be very far down some internet rabbit holes to start using insults like that though. That's my biggest fear in life, to be honest. Drinking, gambling by myself, getting into arguments with strangers and yelling at them, "Hey, wanna step outside, Fujo shit?" Come on, I'll be using more respectable insults. But you might be wondering, what could have possibly happened to make this otherwise presumably reasonable person write something like this, and why did he quote unquote yeet the French wiki? Well, what happened is that the French wiki ended the partnership. It was completely one-sided. And now Follower of Light tries to make them no longer wanting to associate with him out as his own doing. I started with this example because it's very indicative of a larger trend. People distance themselves from Follower of Light, and his response is to start talking about how they didn't contribute anything anyways. And now he's by himself. So why do people keep cutting ties with him? The short answer is that he's not very nice to people. The long answer consists of me explaining why. And of course, nice is subjective. We live in a time where there are always some people that just want to nitpick in order to feel intellectually superior. Sometimes while making these videos, I'm unsure of how much I should trust my viewers. If I over-explain stuff, it drags down the pace, and no matter how blatant I make everything, there will always be people that misunderstand something, intentional or not. I was writing the script and thinking to myself how I best explain why his actions are quote-unquote not nice. But do I have to explain to you that most people don't tolerate being called slurs and that you shouldn't be hostile towards people? Do I have to explain to you that leaking someone's private information on Kiwi Farms, a harassment site, basically just to fuck with someone, just to get strangers to try and harass him into casting kamikaze is a no-go? Well, to Follower of Light I'd have to explain that, else we wouldn't be here right now. But to start, raise your hands if you've ever actively visited Kiwi Farms. For me, the only time I heard the name Kiwi Farms before I started doing research for this video was when it was on the news, either because it was getting shut down or because someone cast kamikaze because of it. According to Follower of Light, Kiwi Farms is one of the most active sites on the planet and has users from every political spectrum. So let's just look at numbers. During its prime in 2022, the site had 16,000 daily logins. And that's a high sounding number, but let's put it into perspective. Chess.com, the leading site for playing chess, averages 11 million daily logins and peaked at 100 million. So when comparing the peaks, Kiwi Farms has 0.016% of the users. And that's compared to a site to play chess. That's not Twitter, that's not Facebook, but one of the many sites for playing chess. It clearly isn't one of the most active sites on the planet, but he describes it that way to downplay how far away from societal norms you have to be in order to visit that site and try to start a harassment campaign. The political spectrum thing is also wrong, but I don't want this video to devolve into me rambling about Kiwi Farms. The reason I'm even talking about it is because Follower of Light, as I hinted at earlier, got the DragonQuest.org wiki kicked out of the Nintendo Independent Wiki Alliance back in 2022 after leaking chat logs from a private group chat of newer members. I don't want to go in depth on what exactly he leaked. You could say that it was incriminating, but still, this is exactly what I meant earlier. I don't have to explain to any of you that you just don't do that. If one of your friends sent you a video of them spraying graffiti, even if you don't like it, you either talk to them about it, or if you really want to be anal about it, you go to the police. But nobody in their right mind would leak that on a harassment site. The recent censorship drama surrounding Dragon Quest has made me start to question whether I can trust the Dragon Quest fandom to have that much of what I think is common sense. And that same drama has made Follower of Light very confident in himself. Just from my description earlier, you can assume where in the political spectrum the average Kiwi Farm user falls and what their opinions are on, for example, trans people. So when there was a lot of attention on Dragon Quest due to people's outrage with the character select screen saying type A and type B instead of male and female, Follower of Light started getting more and more arrogant and more convinced that he is in the right. As a former editor of the .org wiki so eloquently put it, "Man, we should have listened to the newer guy that summer. You really are not fit to lead a community. All your civility is gone. Was all that a mask? In that case, why would anyone want to associate with you? You bring way too much negativity and disrespect to the table." That was in October of 2024, right after the French wiki cut ties. And I just want to quickly talk about Follower of Light's response, probably in way too much detail. He starts off saying, "Civility is only given to those who earn it, same as everything else in life." And that's already an awful start. He says this as if it was so matter of fact, but it's just words. The common phrase that respect is only given to those who earn it makes sense, but civility is not something you give. It defines your behavior. And keep in mind, this is talking about civility, not respect. This isn't about addressing someone in a formal manner. This is about him calling people slurs that I don't want to show on YouTube. In his mind, if you don't earn it first, you don't deserve to not be called slurs. And as you will see if you read ahead, the guy throws around slurs as if he was a monkey throwing around its own feces. There's nothing civil about him. And then he goes on to just throw out the terms blame shifting and gaslighting. Like the guy is convinced that he is justice himself and everyone that challenges his authority has to somehow be twisting his words and has to be fabricating a narrative to pin this on him. There's zero self-reflection. And the answer to why he is so confident follows. He explains that on every platform people are on his side and supporting his views, which include calling non-binary people all sorts of slurs. I don't like that currently nobody is challenging his views, which is part of why I'm making this video right now. But the last paragraph is why I'm even showing you this in the first place. He talks about how it's fine if affiliates keep leaving and it's fine if he's the only person working on the site, just as long as there's no better site. Ultimately, he doesn't care that the site is trash, he only cares about it being relatively more viewed trash than the other wikis. I really dislike that he's the most influential person when it comes to English information on Dragon Quest games. He's so complacent, so arrogant, so ungrateful to everyone else that ever contributed. He's resting on his laurels, but do you know how many comments I get on my guides talking about how bad the information on the wiki is? He ends by asking where this deeply offended Dragon Quest community that can't stand the reporting he's done is. And I'll tell you, they're the people who distance themselves from you, they're the rest of the community outside of your one-man bubble. Yet he claims that it doesn't exist because normal people hate this. Seriously man, propaganda that racists are forcing Howie to shove into his game? It's completely unhinged and factually wrong. What he means is that totally real SJWs from the States forced the change from male to female to Type A and Type B in Dragon Quest 3 HD. But that can't be the case since Japan-only games over the last decade were already doing this. Dragon Quest X, Walk and Champions are just a few examples, but Follower of Light knows all this. Before typing his rant he was already told. But even the best arguments in the world are powerless before him plugging his ears and saying, "La, I can't hear you." I'm not trying to convince him, there's no helping that guy. And the short rant of his is only the tip of the iceberg. I could make this segment multiple hours long, but there's not that much to be gained from talking about him. I do want to use the state of the .org wiki as a cautionary tale though. Follower of Light was already a spiteful weirdo before the grifting over the 3HD censorship started. But society normally doesn't let hateful people be themselves. And my phrasing might not make it sound that way, but I think that's great. Intolerance shouldn't be tolerated, and since he knew that, Follower of Light was able to function for 2 years. But when grifters from outside the community started firing shots at Square Enix, he started feeling normal and eventually comfortable acting the way he wanted. The loudest voices were all throwing around the same anti-woke narrative, so Follower of Light must have been in the right. And those people on Twitter ruthlessly insult anyone that doesn't share their opinion, so that must be acceptable behavior. Fast forward to current date and nobody accepted it. He's all by himself. Turns out once the grifters moved on, everyone else distanced themselves from the guy. In my eyes, this is where the fault lies, and it's why anyone looking to work on a wiki doesn't really have a place to go. It's due to the grifters that are willing to harm the Dragon Quest IP, its fandom and everyone who follows them for clout. And this is why I'm really making this video. The state of Dragon Quest information is as bad as it is as a direct result of the grifters. They very tangibly hurt the fandom. But despite that, I bet a few of you don't even have a super clear stance. You might still be thinking that they had some valid points, which is completely understandable. But I don't think it's acceptable and I want to change it. Be it this community or any other fandom, what happened to Dragon Quest is a case we can learn from and we can become more aware of certain rhetoric trickery, logical fallacies, outright lies and the steep cost of tolerating the intolerant. The first wave of outrage happened after the choice between appearance A and B was revealed. The claims that were commonly thrown around were: Square still works with Sweet Baby Inc., gender-specific subclasses and gender-specific gear would be removed, the puff scene would be removed, and those changes were all made to pander to Western ideologies. And back then, at this point, I already made a 15-minute video that aged really well. To summarize, I was right and the people that I was arguing against were wrong. Now, thanks to hindsight, I luckily don't have to spend so much time on this anymore.
New report details that Square Enix removed the Puff encounter.
I can just show footage of the Puff scene and call the people that were whining about its removal stupid.
So it kind of left it unknown. Are they still working with them? Well, I think I have an answer for all of you. It looks like the answer is yes.
Now we know that Sweet Baby Inc. wasn't involved. It's not in the credits. He was wrong. Gender-specific gear is still in the game, and the subclasses getting removed was still just an outright lie, even back then, because there was never such a thing as subclasses in the original.
Apparently, there were subclasses based on gender. They were distinguished by gender.
And lastly, the claim that the changes were made to appeal to Western ideologies is another lie. How can it be Western if the Japan-only games have already been doing it for so long? And now the Japanese version of 3HD even has less clarification on the gender. It sure seems like a creative decision to me. But nowadays you don't hear any of these claims except the last one thrown around. That is because of the way grifters operate. The easy strategy to get an outrage going if there's nothing there is to lie, but you need quantity. It's key that there are so many claims that it becomes impossible to debunk all of them. And by the time the grifters are forced to apologize for spreading lies, nobody cares anymore and people have already moved on to the next lie. In my original video, I predicted that that's what would happen. And sadly, my prediction was correct. The next news that came out were that the female warrior and Gardabout would be getting censored. A change that we now in hindsight know for a fact was made to appeal to the Japanese rating boards. They said so in the interview. It's so indisputable that even Follower of Light had to say it on the .org wiki. So anyone that claimed that
Japanese companies bend the knee to Western activists
is either lying to get people angry or they're regurgitating someone else's lie. That was then soon followed by a pretty large video by this YouTuber called Asmongold. This drew a lot more people who aren't interested in Dragon Quest but instead interested in being angry online towards the community. But it didn't provide anything new. Then the game launched, which somehow spawned even more misinformation about it.
gender's still removed, and they even went out of their way to remove gendered speech.
Like look, there's a he, so he's wrong. There's the feminist pirate captain speaking about womanhood, stop lying. And I know what he meant, but it's very intentionally phrased in such a way that the target audience, who again is boycotting the game, will interpret it as literally gendered speech being removed, since that's what he's saying. What he meant is that the hero is no longer addressed as a boy or girl in the intro. And I wasn't going to give this so much time, but Aquano bought this and Aquano played the game.
They basically gender neutralized every single dialogue, which is not a big deal, but I do find it like weird.
Did any of you ever consider that they removed the mention of this player choice because unlike the Super Famicom version, I don't know if you noticed, 3HD is voice acted.
I'll go and wake them now.
They would have had to do a second take, so leaving it out is very normal. Not even acknowledging this possibility is almost as disingenuous as everything else they're saying. The main thing that was different from what we expected is that the English localization made a change due to all the outrage. Unlike the Japanese version, it clarifies that choosing appearance A makes you play as a male character and vice versa. This change was made to appeal to the people that can't handle ambiguity in their game. The outraged people finally got what they wanted and we got a different product from Japan. A bastardized version, no matter how you look at it. And Ranquest's localization team, that was absurdly spineless and just a stupid move. Any action was going to be twisted against them. You will never get any thanks from the outraged anti-woke mob. At most, when someone bends to their will, they will say, "We did it, being angry paid off. How's it taste, Square?" And then they'll keep getting mad at the next thing. It's interesting to check the Twitter accounts from all the people I featured in that video I made back then and to see what they've been up to. I recommend you do it yourself and count how many people you find that regularly post or posted about Dragon Quest but got upset at censorship versus how many people you find that just hate trans people. We like to talk about preservation, but in this case the localization made English 3HD closer to the version that all the transphobes demand than the Japanese version. Because we've gotten to a point where the Japanese text caters less to the transphobes than the English one. Yet people are saying that it's Western influences that are ruining the Japanese IP. How did we concede this much ground to these deranged freaks that we are allowing them to change video games to appeal to nobody other than themselves and their weirdo friends that need the games to specify male or female else it gets cancelled? There's this common trend where people just try to play a Uno-reverse card and say the complete opposite of what's happening. I hate that this is a popular rhetoric nowadays. It's like small children saying, "No, you." The bottom line is that they are the ones that bastardize the product. Their temper tantrums are responsible for the English version being changed to better fit Western standards, since some of us apparently need localizers to add in these clarifications about gender. The people that were trying to cancel 3HD, and you can't argue that arranging boycotts and saying you want Square Enix to go bankrupt is anything other than cancel culture. Those people are out here saying that they want to protect Dragon Quest from the snowflake tourists that are infecting it with the totally real trans ideology. Meanwhile, they are the snowflake tourists sitting there in their basement so outraged at a character select screen that they are trying to cancel the game despite never having played a Dragon Quest game before. The grifters don't have your Dragon Quests or even the industry's best interest in mind. They don't love Dragon Quest, in fact they hate it and they want nothing more than for it to be dead. because that's what's profitable for a grifter. Hate and destruction are the only products they can offer. And they add in disclaimers for plausible deniability. They say that they are not telling you what to do.
I don't want anybody to get it twisted. If you don't care about this and you just want to play the game, I don't care.
But they also can't help but call for a boycott.
I just hope that people stop buying and supporting games that do this. Just totally stop supporting them.
You can't say that you're not telling people what to do while also saying they should boycott the game, and it magically gives you plausible deniability that you're not trying to boycott it. No, it just makes you look like an idiot. Actions speak louder than words. Even I could write that I have nothing but love for everyone in my about section. That doesn't make it real. And if I put a disclaimer here not to insult anyone, and then go on to not moderate my comment section and let it evolve into a shit show, then that would make me a spineless hypocrite. And the other comments under these videos make it very clear. They don't want any more Dragon Quest. In their eyes, the series did something bad that they won't tolerate. So the only logical response is to cancel Dragon Quest. And to justify that, they're using mental gymnastics, or given how often they skip the part where they try to not be inconsistent, it's more like mental golfing, and they forcibly twist the situation so that they can profile themselves as being the people that fight for games. And the enemy are the totally real people that keep complaining to Square that they needed male and female to be changed to appeal to Western standards. Do me a favor and go look at the official Dragon Quest Twitter and scroll through the comments until you find 3 people that are angry at Square. Do they demand more censorship, or are they angry at the censorship? Small hint. Those strawmans that the anti-woke audience loves getting mad at don't exist. There is no trans ideology. This wasn't some kind of secret agenda. Just stop it. Just stop making things up to get mad about for no reason. It's not happening. There are like 3 weirdos in the world that the grifters can use as their very select single examples, and they are reliant on them. What I'm talking about isn't individual weirdos, it's a trend. Like, you can go to the official Dragon Quest Twitter right now, scroll through comments, and without fail find some anti-woke outrage. While you won't find anyone saying, how dare they show so much skin on this character, we need to boycott this game, send death threats to the developers. You will find plenty of people saying, how dare they censor this game, we need to boycott this game, death to all trans people. My stance is that both of these theoretical people are out of their mind, but I'm just saying, one of them is real and one isn't. There was this tweet that is still up as of writing this, sitting at 35,000 views, more than this video will get, where they just tell people to send death threats to Square Enix. So on Twitter you can just tell people to send out death threats and get away with it? I find that really disgusting. By the way, me saying that the grifters that instigated this failed boycott are tourists doesn't mean that their points would have been more valid if they knew more about Dragon Quest. If I did, this would only result in a discussion devolving into the stick measuring contest of who's the bigger fan. What matters is not whether you are a Dragon Quest fan, it's whether you're an idiot. Or an asshole. It's sometimes hard to tell whether they even believe their own grifts. Their quote-unquote activism consists of them posting YouTube videos, of them spouting lies and calling for boycotts. This is the easiest way of detecting whether someone cares about a topic. Look at what they have on their channel. All of the big figures that reported on the Type A and Type B thing were the people whose entire backlog consists of videos about drama. Yet they claim that, for example, Wiki isn't a real fan because he doesn't complain about Dragon Quest and doesn't call for boycotts? Shoutouts to that ominous note saying that eventually he will complain, implying you'll be at peace once he does. Like, you don't want him to be happy, you want him to be just as upset and miserable as you are? What is wrong with you? But past that, if it did matter, which one of the two strikes you as a Dragon Quest fan, or if you wanna be cringe, as a real gamer? The guy whose channel is dedicated to Dragon Quest or video games in general? Or the guy whose channel is dedicated to hating on video games and calling for their boycotts? And you might say that I'm making them out to be too big a deal. At the end of the day, the boycotts failed and 3HD outsold expectations. But to that, I want to open up another layer of shit, which is that they don't even want the boycotts they're calling for. To a degree, sure, they don't want their fans to play these games and see that they're just fine, but ultimately the boycott isn't the point. Their goal is to convince people in the Dragon Quest community of their ideology. It's to advertise themselves to people like Follower of Light, to get some fame and some ad revenue, and to quickly move on to the next drama. Everything they do and say is a calculated business move, not necessarily reflective of their opinions, but reflective of what they think is the most profitable opinion to express. That's why there are so many contradictions. It's just populism. And even the reality of the situation doesn't matter. It's process-oriented activism, and they would never admit this, but they need drama, they need things to make out as problems. If they were successful and the boycotts made the gaming industry change forever, let's just pretend they were fighting real problems for a second, then they'd be out of a job. And spoilers, they aren't fighting real problems. They're already out of a job, so now they're lying and clinging to every small bit of news that they can twist into a scandal. But I'm ignoring the elephant in the room. What about the interview where Howie said that trans people are ruining the gaming industry? If you're not living under a rock, you've probably seen the snippet out of a much longer interview before, since it gets quoted a lot. Howie is a very respected figure and we all highly value his opinion, at least when his opinion fits our narrative, else you all ignore it. But let's look at what he actually said. In Dragon Quest you used to be able to choose between a male and female main character. But now you can't choose between a man and a woman anymore, we have to label them as type 1 and type 2. I really wonder who's even complaining about this. That is the quote, that's all. He isn't even showing frustration. And keep in mind, this is all they got. Howie says one thing that could be interpreted as him being frustrated with having to make certain changes, which somehow means he's quote unquote on the side of the grifters and supports everything they say. And we're just meant to ignore every single time he told people to buy 3HD? No matter how you spin this, you can't call for a boycott and not disagree with the series creator. And Square Enix is trying to get that clip off the internet, which means they don't stand behind it anymore. But those hateful basement-dwelling weirdos can't let it go, because they have nothing else. They need these rare single examples, else they'd have to go back to lying about puff puffs getting removed. Something Howie said in a live interview situation is being twisted into this massive scandal where, by the way, Dragon Quest is no longer even mentioned. So much for their care for the series. And this is clearly childish. The anti-woke side of the discussion has no valid arguments, so instead of logic they over-rely on these examples of people messing up by not making it 100% clear that they're taking a stance against the outrage. If you give in even the tiniest bit, they'll try and take it all. Someone says, hey, I'm not a big fan of censorship myself, but, and they won't listen to the end. They're convinced that you agree with them that all trans people need to be eradicated. The worst part is that for us, our own standards are the only thing holding us back from doing it ourselves. Look at what these grifters say when their mask slips.
They come from an inferior culture.
Look at how they quote absolute bullshit that they can't have read because it's so blatant that it's unfounded nonsense. Look at the sort of shit they write. And look at how they do it again and again. Those people try to tell us what to think. Are you kidding me? In my previous video I said, right now the voice of reason is whimpering while being taken out back like a dog. And I don't want us to continue letting that happen. The next time there's some big scandal because a Dragon Quest 12 character is androgynous, I want the community to be intolerant towards the intolerant. And to do that we need to rethink our approach to handling the issue. Normal humans, you know, as opposed to basement-dwelling grifters or hateful people like Follower of Light, we normal humans try to aim for a healthy, realistic middle ground. During the initial drama, in my video, the final verdict was, think for yourself, play the game for yourself and don't let yourself be influenced by this nonsense. The verdict from the grifters was to send death threats to Square Enix. If one group aims for a reasonable middle and the other aims to end all trans people or to cancel all the games, we're never going to arrive at that middle. If we want to make it to a point where you can voice reasonable opinions about the censorship without getting called every slur in the book, we need to lower our standards and change our goalpost. You know how a common response from anti-woke folk to people saying that the censorship is not a big deal is to say that you can't let shit slide because everything will turn to shit? That is a point I agree with. We can't let grifters get away with taking a dump all over Dragon Quest. A problem with that is that there aren't enough people that are deep in Dragon Quest, meaning there's not enough voices willing or able to point out the bullshit. You know how many arguments were just entirely fabricated back then? And they got away with it. Had you wanted to make a video about the censorship, it would have sufficed to just say words. How many of them do you think backed up their claims? You know, any of the fear-mongering they were doing over the runtime. I haven't found a single one. I found a lot of people throwing around that Sweet Baby Inc. is responsible for it. And when that turned out to be untrue, there was zero backlash. If you made up absolute nonsense, guess what? Nobody cares anymore. Nobody's going to hold you accountable. But that is what this community needs. Critical eyes and the drive to force changes. They don't even notice how stupid it looks to cite awesome Dragon Quest facts. And chances are the people that watch their stuff don't either. So let's tell them. In a more practical sense, when a grifter goes around inventing enemies, and yes, these certified basement dwellers that spend their time on Kiwi farms or 4chan have the nerve to make up theoretical basement dwellers and to profile themselves as quote-unquote normal. When they make up enemies, we're stuck arguing against their accusations instead of calling them out for all their lies. If you see some grifter, not just someone misguided, but someone who goes out of their way to exclusively produce hateful content, who for example says that puff-puffs are getting removed because of the trans ideology and we need to boycott 3HD, then we shouldn't try to reasonably explain that there's no such thing as a trans ideology. If you know, then you can call out that the thing about puff-puffs is a lie. Just don't do it politely, because chances are it wasn't an honest mistake. But most important of all, we should use their own weapons against them. They need to be met with a dense wave of animosity for pulling that sort of nonsense. We should let them know that they are not welcome. There should be no more, hey, it's not a big deal in response to someone telling people to send out death threats. We need to match their intensity at least a little. By that I don't mean that we need to be slinging around slurs, but we can start taking back all the rhetorics and narratives they are hogging. They are the ones changing the product. They are the snowflakes getting offended. They are the tourists, and the tourists that they argue against don't exist. I highly respect a lot of Dragon Quest YouTubers, but I'll be honest, none of them spoke out when the grifting was going on, and if they did, it was half-hearted. And remember what I said earlier, give them an inch and they'll take a mile. None of those videos, no matter how reasonable, ended well. Not to mention that the loudest voices back when this was going on weren't the people that were trying to see every side of the argument. They were the people that absolutely hate Dragon Quest and think it should cease to exist. If there's another drama like this, we'll at this rate have to endure even more shit. And I don't want to have to tolerate this uneducated, unfounded sort of nonsense going unchecked. You can make a video about puff-puffs getting removed and get 0 dislikes. The current state of the community is such that someone like Follower of Light can be a known issue. A lot of people would love to work on a wiki but don't because they don't want to help someone like him. And we just sort of accept it? There's nobody in the community willing or able to do anything about it. There was and still is no voice of reason in the Dragon Quest community, even if I'm trying to be one right now. Most of all, I just want to make more story analysis style videos and I want to make more guides, but those feel Sisyphean at the moment. I already made 5+ hours of guide content on my channel, giving out information that should be common knowledge that you can't find anywhere else in the English speaking world. But I'm just a single person, I can't make those guides quickly enough, and day 1 or day 2 of a new game's launch will still be filled with misinformed slop. And even if, to my knowledge, no English guide even comes close to the completeness of any of the ones I made, that still doesn't make them perfect. For example, in my guide on party building in 3HD, I didn't mention that your AoE spells have damage multipliers that are based on how many enemies they hit. So while I explained that for mages hitting a high enough level to learn the Crackle spell is really good for a huge stretch, I didn't fully articulate why. I mentioned the part that it's effective against most of the bosses. It also gets this multiplier when you're only hitting one enemy, which is part of why it outperforms the single target spells. And in the tips video I made, I was outright wrong about the sap spell. My testing got me to a reasonable conclusion, but in reality the single stacks you apply have independent timers and gradually wear off, meaning another cast never refreshes the duration. And yet another thing I never mentioned was that sap is no longer a defense reduction, but instead gives you a damage multiplier against that enemy, which is a lot worse since enemies have so much defense, meaning your base damage is low. Ultimately, having good resources is a community effort, and for that we can't have people like Follower of Light losing their mind and throwing a tantrum. And you might wonder why I listed so many of my mistakes. Wouldn't one have been enough? Nobody besides me knew I made those mistakes, nobody commented, I have nothing to gain from this. But I care about being in the right and I think there's value in transparency. so I don't want to be wrong on something minor like that a spell works slightly differently. And you know, I strongly dislike this honest rhetorical sleight of hand where you lie, don't prove anything and act like it's proven. No matter how many times a lie is repeated, it won't magically turn into the truth. I want to call that out, whether it's my mistakes or someone else's. Now at this point, if you're still watching, you either agree with me or you're a grifter still unsuccessful in your attempt to pick out a part of this video to criticize in order to try and invalidate the whole thing. If you're the latter, I just want to put this little clip of Dragon Quest being actively pro-trans here. Say something about that now, won't you? Or maybe explain to me why so many Japan-only games before 3HD had body types. Or maybe explain why you disagree with Howie when he tells you to buy 3HD. If you write an angry comment and aren't even capable of mentioning those 3 points, then I'll disregard anything you say and just call you an idiot. Deal? As for everyone else, some misguided sheep in my comments said something I can't help but agree with, at least when generalizing a bit. Anyone that attempts to butt in with complaints about the games and tries to cancel them in any way, shape or form should immediately be shamed and excluded. And I'm not talking about kids that don't know any better. I'm not talking about people that are starting to get sucked into the spiral of hate. There's a lot of good people that associate with the anti-woke mob that aren't too far down the rabbit hole that we should try and help. But I'm specifically talking about hateful people that don't have any goal besides farming outrage. They need to be met with resistance, the same as in other, even non-gaming communities. It's too annoying to try and have a reasonable discussion. They tend to throw out buzzwords that vaguely signal a political affiliation instead of proving anything of substance. Or in general, they throw out a lot of buzzwords, but this approach makes it hard to argue against them. At most, you can question what exactly they meant, which might make them look stupid, but they don't know when they look stupid or they just don't care. They quoted awesome Dragon Quest facts after all. It's not like they have any arguments of their own, nor do they care to listen to yours, which will inevitably attract people since their target audience gravitates towards people that speak with a sense of authority. And since the speculations, for example, aren't a topic that anyone is an authority over, the only people speaking with authority that can claim puff-puffs are 100% going to be removed and the game will be garbage because of it, they're the ones that don't care. And if they get a chance to spout their nonsense, they will find some resonance. This is inevitable, but it needs to be less. Arguing with them is like playing chess with a pigeon, you know the allegory. But if a bird is shitting on your chessboard, you don't tell it, hey, it's not a big deal, relax, you shoo it away. Now that was just a segment on the .org wiki and why it's failing. There's still one more failed wiki for Dragon Quest that some of you might remember because it was relatively recent. It was called Slimepedia, ran by this influencer, and it's the reason why I don't end this video with a positive message like usual and tell you about my own wiki project or anything like that. The guy in question doesn't want to appear in public anymore, at least in the Dragon Quest sphere, so to respect that I won't go into further detail. But the main thing was that the logistical effort of running the wiki was too much for the guy. And if he couldn't do it, then I'm definitely too small a creator right now to start a wiki, even if I'd love to. But I will support any new wiki projects that are on the horizon and keep my subs updated. This video came from me wanting to do wiki work and there just not being a place. But while researching this video, I again talked to a lot of people and there's not only a lot of interest in working on a wiki, there are data dumps from 2022, possible affiliates and forks, everything with the Wiki Alliance was cleared up. Basically there's a path already laid out for whenever someone decides to launch a new wiki project. There just needs to be this initiative. And you know what I was saying earlier about moving the goalpost? There should be so much awareness that someone who cites awesome Dragon Quest facts of all things will never again be able to show their face in public. Either way, this was a bit of a heated topic, so while I usually have a very mature audience, I feel like this is a necessary disclaimer. Don't take your frustrations out in the comments below. I know, a YouTuber telling you not to comment, but I would like to see you put that energy into anything more productive. For example, you could work on a wiki. Oh wait. This, by the way, is why I think this is such a big deal. The censorship might not be, but the people complaining about it definitely are. In other words, unlike them, I'm not even a fake activist, I'm just a hater. There's a lot of people that are motivated and capable of improving the wikis, but there isn't a place to go. If you need information, I can only recommend using the Fandom wiki to get the Japanese name for whatever you're looking for, and then using one of the many great Japanese resources. I'll put a couple in the description. And that might give fandom traffic, but that's leagues better than helping follower of Light keep his sinking ship afloat a little longer. At least that's the state for now, but stay tuned.